What's going on, fellas? This is Mike D with Black Fathers Now. And yo, I got an interesting conversation coming on for y'all today. And part of it is interesting because of the person that I'm interviewing here. But it's really some interesting conversation and interesting content that gets floated out there. And I just wanted some insight from someone who can really give some meat to this argument, so that not argument, but meat to this conversation, so that we can approach it or just see things from a different perspective. But the guy that I'm interviewing is unique in the sense that this is my uncle, right? This is my uncle. And it's funny because I grew up. He's technically my uncle, but he's like a big brother, because of the age difference thing. But I grew up in Augusta with him, and literally it's like my big brother. But it's funny because he's now senior pastor at St. Paul's CME Church in Savannah, Georgia. And we're going to kind of go into his history a little bit and him kind of talking about his life growing up and everything. But it's funny because I'm talking to him as senior pastor of St. Paul, but in Savannah, Georgia. But I still know him as Uncle Day. And Day is Imagery Thurmond Sr. And he's originally from Augusta, Georgia. As I mentioned, currently resides in Savannah, Georgia. He's husband to a beautiful wife, Angie, and father to two almost grown kids. Well, one of them's grown and another one's almost grown kid, right? So you got one grown and almost grown, but a son and a daughter, Ramsey and Max. And just an all-around solid dude, man. And I appreciate him for taking time out of his schedule. I mean, I know I got preference because I'm family and everything, but I appreciate him taking time out of his schedule to come and join Black Fathers Now today. And fellas and everybody else listening, let's welcome my uncle, but my man, also my frat brother too, Omega Psi Phi's in the building. Yes, we're representing. DeAndre Ramsey Thurmond Sr. What's going on, man?
Hey, Mike. I'm glad to join you today. I'm excited about it.
I'm excited about it too.
All right.
All right, man. I appreciate you, man, for real, for taking time out your schedule to chop it up on the airwaves with your boy. But before we get started, I always like to give folks the opportunity to give shout outs. So take a moment to give a shout out to all those connected to you, and for one, you want to stay in the good graces, right?
Absolutely. So we shout out the fam, my wife and kids, obviously. And then certainly the St. Paul family, have been leading now for a number of years. And then certainly the bros, they are, all the bros, all the Qs. And on top of that, just all the friends and those folks I've met along the way. So it's a blessing to be with you.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that, man. And so you mentioned all along the way, you're currently pastor at St. Paul's CME Church in Savannah, Georgia,
right?
But you're not one of these guys who's been preaching since you were like 8 years old.
Right.
Take us back, man. Where did all this stuff begin for you, brother?
Well, I've been preaching now for about a little over, 17, 18 years now. I've been pastoring here at St. Paul for now about 10 years. And prior to that, I pastored a church in Augusta for 3 years. And prior to that, I served in ministry for another 4 years. So I've been doing this quite a while now. But it was a journey. I started out in a middle-class African-American family, during the church thing on Sundays. I started out, with grandparents who were very religious and who impacted their children. Thus, the grandchildren were impacted. And so I grew up with religion as an important part of my makeup, of my village, of what we did. But that didn't mean that I would necessarily look at religion as a career path or as a career path. And so, but I kind of started at a young age, kind of having visions of me one day being a pastor, of me one day sharing ministry. But those visions were, I thought, maybe just childhood dreams or just childhood, ideas. But ultimately, through through some of the transitions and difficulties and struggles in life, I really found out that that's what I believe God was calling me to do.
Mm.
I had a couple of different careers prior to going into full-time ministry. I worked in the hospital and in the allied health field. I was a pharmaceutical rep. I always had this idea that I wanted to help people, to bless people, to help, to be an assistance to people in some way. But literally what I found out is that assistance for me was in sharing the gospel.
Mm.
So health of not only mind, of not only spirit, of not only body, but holistically. So ministry for me is an outcropping of my desire to see people fully healthy,
Mm.
fully what God created. So I could do that in the hospital from one perspective. I could do that helping them with whatever pharmacologic agents they needed from another perspective. But I could never do it the way I'm doing it now as a pastor. So that ultimately is why I do what I do, why I'm in ministry. Because every day I get an opportunity to help somebody live life, I believe, the way God would have them live.
Mm. That's powerful, man. Like, and it's interesting. It's funny. Like I said, I've known you my whole life. And in you mentioning the fact that, from a young age, you felt like this was something in you from an early age, even though you didn't necessarily, I guess, accept that call or act on it until later in life, into your 20s or early 30s. It's interesting that that was something that was there, but you didn't seem to act on it until later in life. Were there instances prior to you fully accepting that call that you kind of like suppressed that feeling? It's like, yeah, but I'm gonna suppress this feeling of having a call, so to speak.
Sure, absolutely. I think that my calling into the ministry was at an early age. I could have been a boy preacher. I
Mm-hmm.
could have been guys who started at 10, 11, 12 years old, because I grew up at the knee of my grandfather, the Reverend James Ramsey Thurmond, who was, for all intents and purposes, my hero as a child. Um, Grew up watching him pastor, watching him care for people, watching him do what ministers I thought are supposed to do. However, he died when I was young. Not only did he die, but my father died and my other grandfather died. So for a period of time, I went through this kind of anger with God, this kind of maybe all this stuff we preach and teach is not really real. Maybe it's a fallacy. Maybe it's something. Maybe it's the anesthetic of the masses, as some call religion.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe what I found out is then through my own challenges in marriage, challenges having children. What I found out is that God is real. Not only is God real, but that God had a plan for my life that I couldn't see even when I was younger. So that push towards helping people, that push towards people being whole, came out of my life experience. I started off just wanting to be there, to be that person to help and to assist. But ultimately, it became a discovery of what is the best way to help people. Who is that has that song now? You want to live your best life.
Yeah. Lil Duval. Yep.
Oh, yeah, but I found out that living your best life literally meant living a life that is dedicated to God.
Mm.
And in that kind of life, you really do live your best life and experience your best life. So that's kind of my journey was one of discovery, that through the pains, difficulties, trials, and tribulations of life, you find that in the most difficult points, that's where God is showing you who God is and what God can do.
That's powerful, man. Like, and it's interesting. Like I said, I talk to you 3 or 4 times a week, and you learn more. I'm learning more now in this conversation here than I've learned in some of these conversations, and that we have on a regular basis. So it's interesting. So this is Black Fathers Now, and you mentioned, obviously your grandfathers passed away when you were younger, but then you also lost your father, and from that point, it caused you to I guess, not necessarily be lost, but just to kind of be in this notion in which I'm seeking or I'm trying to find this particular direction. And I know we can't go back, and replay life standpoint of what would have happened or whatever. But do you, like you mentioned, that this call or this thing has been inside of you since you were a kid? Do you think if those male influences had been there the whole way, you would have had the comfort to potentially pursue that earlier in life versus, kind of going in another direction and pursuing business and, healthcare and all of that?
I think that you could look at that from both perspectives.
Mm.
The reality is, I could have also felt like life was so comfortable.
Mm.
Everything was the way it was supposed to be, that what do I need to share that message for? I've got everything I want, and I've never had to want for anything. So the reality is, I think that the tragedies and difficulties of life often are used by God to put us in a position where we're more available than we would have been before.
Mm.
And so my own personal struggles and transitions through, this is Black Fathers Now, so missing the important role models in my life, missing those people, having to fill that void, kind of left me looking for something that ultimately I found, but it was a journey.
Mm.
It was a struggle. I easily could have gone off the deep end. I easily could have um, not just lost my way, but never come back to the way. But ultimately, through the struggles and the trials of life, I found God doing something that just blew my mind. And so now, as a father, I look at my kids and I recognize that the only reason they are here is because of who God was and is for me.
Mm.
My story was that we couldn't have kids. My story was that that we had a very, very difficult time, and there's many people who go through that. But in the end, uh, God showed Himself strong, and so ultimately, it was through all of that transition I found God again after I'd sort of left God.
Mm. And it's interesting how you talk about the concept of journey, and the concept of Black Fathers Now is to really talk to brothers, and they really share their story and share their journey. And the whole thing is really finding ideas or finding points in their journey that other brothers can connect to, but then can apply to their life right now, or in the sense of it's something they can think about in their life or something they can actually take action on right now. That's the title, Black Fathers Now. It's not just talking about Black fathers, but it's Black fathers talking about their journeys, the insight, the inspiration, the wisdom that they gain, but then taking it back and finding things that other brothers can learn from and apply, at this particular moment. Because, information that you can't utilize is kind of pointless. Like, we're not trying to be contestants on Jeopardy. We're trying to do what we're called to do in life. We're trying to impact the world. We're trying to, spread light and let your light shine to impact someone else. And so it was powerful for you to just share the fact that, it was this moment you were going through a journey in which you felt lost, and there were some things that you thought weren't necessarily possible. And so while you were lost, and while these things that you thought were not possible, and, having kids and all of that, everything kind of came full circle, and it all came together, and that helped you to see the true reason behind it all, which was God Himself.
Right. And recognizing that other people go through those same transitions,
Mm.
trials and tribulations. So my goal, my ministry, my work is about helping others to make it through those same transitions.
Mm.
Uh, Life is not a straight line. It's a line with a lot of curves, but it's also a line with a lot of character builders along the way.
Mm.
And so those curves, those sharp turns right or left, those are all times when you can either be constructed or deconstructed.
Mm.
And sometimes in the deconstruction process, it's really getting you to the place of foundation where you need to be. So for me, uh, losing the three most important male role models in my life, going through high school, finishing up high school, going through college and all of the challenges of college without those male role model sort of guidepost along the way, then getting married, starting a career without those male strong role models in my life, then sort of trying to have kids, not being able to have kids, struggling through what marriage looks like, struggling through whether I'll stay married or not married, all of that, and not having those male role models impacted me tremendously.
Mm.
However, what I found out is that the influence of the real male role models I did have was so powerful that ultimately it helped to bring me back to where I needed to be.
Wow.
So the 12 years with one grandfather, the teenage years with a dad who was sick the last two, and another grandfather who died suddenly, they all impacted and influenced me in such a powerful way that when I got to be about 29, 30, 31, I realized what I had, even though I thought I lost it. What I realized is I never really lost it. I had it the whole time.
Mm.
And then that pushed me and helped me go into the direction of the ministry where I could then provide that same, hopefully provide that same type of leadership, that same type of example, that same type of hope to someone else who's facing those struggles.
What's powerful about your journey is, everything in life happens for a reason, right? And what's interesting also with that is a lot of times the things that we go through are not necessarily for us, but they're intended to help somebody else, right? And so you mentioned, the issues by losing both grandfathers, and then, your father through your teenage years, but then coming back to understanding that you really hadn't lost them, because that time was valuable and that was enough to impart some wisdom in you. But those things, or that notion of losing, gives you the ability to connect with other people who have lost, or like you mentioned, the struggles early on, with marriage, give you the ability to connect with other couples who may be struggling, because on the surface, a lot of people want to see something that they can directly connect to. And this is going to go into what we're going to talk a little bit about in a minute, but people like to see things that they can directly connect to. And so, it's not that we want to celebrate bad decisions or celebrate, challenges, or celebrate the hardship. But the thing is, those hardships, what I find personally, are the things that are kind of the tie that bind between you and other people. It's like we can identify with each other's struggle.
Absolutely. I think that's when you develop real kinship.
Mm-hmm.
Not on the mountain, not on the plateau, not when you're on the top of the heap, but in the journey to the top of the mountain,
Mm.
in the journey up the hill, uh, through the valleys of life. That's when you develop a real kinship. That's when you develop a real affinity for one another. That's when you learn who a person really is through the tough moments in life.
Mm.
And so, but you also learn a lot about yourself through those moments in life. So I learned about who I am. I learned about what makes me tick. I learned about what pushes me forward. I learned about, my own weaknesses and where I need assistance. I learned all of that through the most difficult trials in life. And I think that Black men, so often, we don't take time to look at ourselves or our journeys, uh, and take note of what lessons we've learned.
Mm.
Um, you know, Mistakes are really nothing but opportunities to grow if we look at them that way.
Mm.
And so the mistakes you've made along the way, for every brother, the mistakes you've made along the way can really be rungs on a ladder to a higher level if you allow them.
You got to allow.
You got to allow them. You got to be open to it. You got to be open to growth. You must not want to stay in the same place you're in now, same predicament. And so that's what I've learned along the journey. I've learned along the way. So that's how I feel about everything. I've done this several times, and I would encourage anybody to do it. If you ever get an opportunity, sit down and write your own autobiography. Sit down and write what were the important moments in your life, and once you take stock of those, then go back and look and ask yourself, what did I learn in that moment? What did I in that time period? What am I still learning from that time period? It's a great blessing when you take time to do that.
You know, and it's powerful because we didn't even talk specifically about this, but you know, one of my speaking verticals is this concept called double down on you. And when you think about that, the whole premise behind double down on you is this acronym called GIFT, GIFT. But the concept is you embrace your greatness while pursuing your interest, recognizing your faults and failures, but then guarding yourself against your triggers. And so the whole concept there is really putting together this gift, what I call gift, your gift puzzle. Because when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we in essence are like a 500-piece puzzle, right? And there's so many different facets to us that are complicated. Some things are very clear, but other things we have to put one piece in place before another one fits. It's kind of like a puzzle. And the thing about a puzzle, if you take a 500-piece puzzle and you hand someone one piece of that puzzle and you ask them to let you know or ask them to tell you, what does this puzzle make a picture of? They can't tell you by looking at one piece, right? But a lot of times we only have access to one or two pieces of this 500-piece puzzle that makes up us. So to your point, I think that's powerful, fellas, to really take a sit down and really write your own autobiography, but really just take an inventory of who you are, the good, the bad, the ugly, your triggers, the things you've messed up on, the things that you've succeeded at. You know, really take a full inventory of who you are and put all that out there and just understand yourself. One of the books you actually recommended me to read, this was probably about a year or so ago, that Know Thyself by Naeem Akbar. You think you remember recommending me that book? It's a powerful book. But one of those things, it literally kind of falls into that category of just taking time to take a self-inventory, but to really know who you are, know where you come from, know your value, know your weaknesses, right? Know your triggers. That's with the double down on you. One of the things that gets the most conversation when I present it is the concept of triggers, because a lot of people don't take time to really understand what is that causes you to go from 0 to 100. But then also, do you put something in place to guard yourself against that? Because if you don't guard yourself against those triggers that you have in your life, then you have the potential for that trigger to overcome or overrun who you are and get you out of character. And we know what that does for a lot of folks.
Right. I agree. I think that your own autobiography is not necessarily for public consumption. It's for internal consumption.
Absolutely.
It's a growth mechanism. Yeah.
Well, fellas, I hope you're paying attention to that, man, because the Reverend DeAndre Thurmond Sr. says you should write your own autobiography. I'm gonna mess with him, but but we kind of touched on it a minute ago, and this is actually one of the real reasons I wanted to kind of bring you on to kind of give me your perspective on it. We talked about the concept of folks like to connect, so by having a journey, people can connect to your journey by not necessarily being a person who is just, you know, on a platform or in the public eye, so to speak, but you're someone that, you know, has connected with other people based on your own previous activities. It allows folks to say, you know, I can identify with this person. In the realm of the church and in the realm of Christianity, you know, the core of that is Jesus. And what's interesting, and this is something that I see pop up periodically, you know, across social media, it are discussions around the imagery of Jesus, right? And so growing up in churches, you know, we a lot of times see this image of this kind of sandy, blonde-haired guy with blue eyes, you know, kind of looking very Italian-ish or whatnot as the image that is represented of Jesus. And when I look at a lot of different things, because I consume content on a lot of different levels, especially kind of in, kind of the quote unquote, the woke segment, there's a lot of criticism for Christianity, and a lot of it stems from the imagery and a lot of the images that were utilized in the creation of the image of Jesus that a lot of us see. So as Black folks, as Black fathers wanting to connect to something, you see that there's a lot of disconnect now for especially a lot of the young folks, a lot of us that are younger. There's a lot of disconnect for Black folks in regards to the church. And some of it stems from the imagery that was utilized. Coming from the theologian's perspective, or, from your perspective, it's like, how do we as Black men, as Black fathers, kind of reconcile with the imageries or the imagery that's been portrayed of Jesus, which we know is not necessarily an accurate depiction?
Sure. I think that imagery is important in everything, not just in the church. So image is a depiction of what is real. And so for many of us, what ends up happening is we allow the depiction of what we believe to be real to be given to us by others who, for one reason or another, want power. And so imagery is all about the power of perception. So when you allow, so an image is a picture of what is real, someone's depiction of what is real. So for them, if the image of God is of a God who looks like them, who is made like them, who then talks like them, walks like them, and behaves like them, they have the power of that God because they have depicted what is real. And so for Black fathers, what we have to do is we have to be careful of the imagery that not only we consume, but we allow our families to consume, because that image then gives power to the reality that is behind it. So therefore, imagery of blonde-haired, blue-eyed, slim-nosed, thin-lipped God gives power to those who represent that in the society that is around us, in the community that is around us. And if all our little boys and girls see is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, thin-nosed, thin-lipped Jesus or God, then obviously that gives greater influence to all of those who look like that and assume positions of power in our lives. It also speaks to our subconscious on the level of, you are not qualified to assume positions of power, nor is anyone that looks like you qualified or able to assume a position of power. If God's son looks like this, and then the principal at your school looks like this, then the coach of your team looks like this, and then the president of your nation looks like this, and then the supervisor on your job looks like this, subconsciously, you feel or may feel as though I have no chance, no real opportunity to ever assume power for my own life. And so that's why the imagery that our children see, the imagery that our families see, is so very important. But it goes beyond just the church. It goes to the movies we watch. It goes to the books we read. It goes to the restaurants and the retail facilities that we frequent and spend our money. It goes to the people that we allow to coach our children. It goes to all of this because that imagery becomes your idea of what reality really looks like. So from my perspective, that's why it's important that we put our children in position to see others who look like them in positions of authority and power.
Mm.
It becomes critical that they see that not only in their religious imagery, that they know that they are made in the likeness, it's just what the book says, and the image of God, but not only that they see it in the religious structures that are around them, but they also see it in the school. They also see it in the business owner who's down the street. They also see it in the bank president when they walk in with their mama or their daddy.
Mm.
They also see it in the books that they read. So imagery is extremely important because it impacts how we see the reality around us.
Mm. I mean, that's powerful. I mean, and I think it's so important because imagery gives social proof, right? It, in essence, lets you know that there's something tangible that I can, again, it goes back to the notion of identifying or connecting to. And, in our social settings, in schools, in business, in our environment, it's so important to connect with folks that especially with your kids. I mean, fellas, we think about our kids growing up, we want them to see social proof of possibility. I even think about regardless of what people's political persuasion is, when you think about like the election of Obama, right? When we take a step back and growing up, and we all, folks will say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to be president. And most parents will be like, yeah, baby, you can be president. But truthfully, most parents, if we're really honest about it, in the back of their mind was like, yeah, you can say that, but that you need to pick something more realistic because that ain't going to happen, right? Until there's a tangible example that we can now point to and say, you know what, it is possible. And so it shows the social proof of what's there. But back to when we were talking about from the standpoint of like with the church and the imagery that was created for Jesus, it was so important, for you to say that as well, because it's hard. And I think a lot of us struggle with the notion of seeing this image that's still being depicted, even in the Black churches, right? Or even with folks, and it's hard to have a conversation because you don't want to come off as if you're questioning, the faith or anything. But then when you see the image there, but then you're like, this image is not congruent with what's written, it's kind of hard. But then it also, when you have outside forces kind of saying, but you see y'all praying to the white Jesus and you're doing this and you're doing that, it's like it conflicts a lot of people. I know at times I've been conflicted, not conflicted in my faith, but then when you start looking at different forces, you're like, this is interesting. So how would you instruct or advise someone that's kind of in this particular space in life to what some, or maybe even some resources to kind of dial in and see things from another perspective so that you can kind of get that connectivity to it as a Black man? Mm-hmm.
Sure. So the first thing to realize is that I think, fundamentally we all have to recognize that we were made in the likeness and the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
So the power of that point is that God is so diverse, and yet I was made to be like God, is a powerful idea. Mm. So from whatever perspective, whether I'm broad-nosed, whether I'm dark-skinned, whether I am tall and lean, or I'm short and thick, this reality is that I was made in God's image and in God's likeness. And since I was made in God's image and God's likeness, then this reality is God loves me for who I am. Mm. Then I have to love me for who I am. And the reality of imagery is so often in the past, imagery has been used to try to teach you not to love yourself, but to love something other than yourself. Looks different than you, to assimilate or want to associate with something that is different than you. And thus, you spend your life trying to reach for something that is never possible. However, when you recognize that for the supreme being of the universe, that supreme being made you like that supreme being self, whether it even be male or female,
Mhm.
is comforting, because then it gives you the understanding that you can be exactly what you were created to be.
Mm.
As a matter of fact, you are what you were created to be. Now let's continue to grow in that likeness. Let's continue to be in that likeness. There's been a lot of study over the years on the imagery in the Bible, certainly the Black presence in the Bible. Charles Copher, Copher, was sort of one of the great fathers of that whole study. Dr. Jeremiah Wright, who we has been a source of controversy, but over the years did great research on the Black presence in the Bible. Another gentleman who does great work on that is biblical scholar Kane Hope Felder,
Mhm.
Felder, out of the Divinity School at Howard University. So some of these names, you could just Google them and find books, and you can find works, especially from Kane Hope Felder and others in his field, who interpret interpret the Bible through the perspective of African Americans, or
Mm.
through a Black perspective, and you get an opportunity to see yourself in Scripture. You
Mhm.
get an opportunity to see those who look like you, those who had some of the same influences you had in Scripture. And when you see that, then you recognize that you don't have to be like someone else or look like someone else to be what God created you to be. I think
Mm.
that's the power of imagery. And I do want to make sure that we look at contemporary culture when we talk about this, because some of the images of African American men in contemporary culture can be very disturbing. The imagery of Black men in drag
Mhm.
can be very disturbing. And it's not just comedians. Now on VH1, there is a popular channel for contemporary for the hip hop age. That's the same channel where Hip Hop Miami and Hip Hop New York and
Mhm.
other things come on. But then on that same channel is an entire group of programs directed around men in drag and men in women's clothes.
Mhm.
So what's the imagery that a young boy sees when he
Mm.
finds the channel, because his dad has been watching Hip Hop Miami, and he turns on and there's some show that RuPaul is on,
Mhm.
someone like RuPaul,
Mm.
begins to see that this imagery is a wonderful image, or he begins to see this is an acceptable, I should say,
Mhm.
acceptable image of what manhood is.
Mm.
That's why we have to be so careful what we allow our families to consume, our children to consume, because those images then become power in the mind of those who take it in. So I
Mm.
think it goes across a lot of different variables, and it's not just in the church. It's all around us. It's all around us. I mean, the imagery of a few years ago, it was Bruce Jenner, who's
Mhm.
now Jenner, and you could just go down. You can just go down and look at all of these different images. Bruce Jenner was a decathlete,
Mhm.
known as the 1976 and 19. He was known as one of the world's greatest athletes, and now one of the world's greatest male athletes. Imagery is changed.
Mm.
So
It's big.
what does that say to what does that say to a Black father? I hope a Black father, I hope a Black man realizes these images are impacting the subconscious of his children.
Mm. The power of imagery. I mean, fellas, listen, I mean, you really have to think about that. The power of imagery. And one of the
Yeah.
things that was powerful that Day mentioned was the fact that I'm made in his image. And when you were explaining it, you know, it was amazing because then you start to realize that I am made in his image is a personal thing, but it's personal to any and everyone. So therefore, how can any and everyone be made in his image if unless this force or this entity is so large that and so powerful that we almost can't even identify with it because it's so large. And and um and one of the things that's so powerful about that, I thought about the song, Donny Hathaway's song, and the very beginning of Donny Hathaway's song, A Song for You, the first line of it says, I love you in a place where there's no space or time. And I was telling someone the other day how that, when you think about God itself, when you think about God, I thought about that line and I'm like, what is the only entity that is not defined by space and time?
Mm-hmm.
You
Right.
know, so it's like I love you in a place where there's no space or time. It's just like it made me think about God. And so when you say I am made in his image, and that's not just me, but that's every other person, the
Right.
only thing that could encompass that would be something that's not bound by space and time. And so I think part of this disconnect for, you know, for me at times and for others may be just this notion of I'm trying to rationalize and understand and compartmentalize and put God or the creator in this box that I can make sense of. And I have to use an image because that's easy for me to identify with. So if I
Right.
can, even if we go and, you know, we've seen on the other side, we've seen pictures of, you know, a brother with dreadlocks and all of that, you know, as
Right.
the image of Jesus. But we're in this, we have this need to create this imagery that we can connect to. And,
Right.
but a lot of that is because it's hard for me to understand something that I can't define by the bounds of space and time.
Right. So we want to limit
Mm,
this God to simply us.
mm,
We want to limit this God to my imagery. We want to limit this
absolutely.
God to my skin color. We want to limit this God, the sort of the theological term is my anthropomorphic qualities. We want to limit God
Hold
to
on,
my.
you got to slow that down. Say that
We
again.
want to
Anthro.
nothing to my human, qualities.
Okay,
But in,
gotcha.
but in reality, what essentially I'm really saying is that the diversity of God is so large, is so far beyond what we know that I can be created in God's image, and an Asian woman can be created in God's image, and it takes nothing from God that she was created in God's image, and I was created in His image as well.
Mm,
That God is big enough to encompass both of us in God's creative power, and that is what is so amazing about I believe about the God we serve. That God is big enough to be all things to all people at the same time.
mm,
God is big enough to be all things to all people at the same time. So I don't have to look at the image of God as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, thin-lipped, slim-nosed human being. I can also look at God as a black man with an afro and a wide nose and thick lips. And I can also see God as a mother figure, a African mother figure, all in the same moment.
mm.
That's the greatness of who God is, and that's the limitations for so many of us in our minds.
Mm. Fellas, I hope you're paying attention to this, man. Don't put limits. Don't put limits on what God is. We want to put them in a box. We want to try to understand them based on the way that we think, but don't put limits on him, because you're made in his image. But guess what? The next man or the next woman is made in his image as well. But also there's power in imagery. Like we mentioned, the imagery within the church, but then imagery in popular culture, or, in modern society. Imagery is extremely important. We have to be very mindful of the images that we consume, but as fathers, that we allow our kids to consume and anybody around us to consume. And we have to honestly be mindful about ourselves as well, because we're not perfect. If we consume too much of something, your mom or my grandma used to always say association leads to assimilation, right? And so to that point, if you associate with various imageries all the time, eventually you assimilate. And so we have to be mindful of that. But the power of imagery, I want you all to really allow that to set in. The power of imagery. Imagery has power. But as it pertains to God, we don't need to put God in a box in which we try to make him connect to one specific image, because he's powerful enough to be associated with all images.
Or even one gender.
Or even one.
That too.
That's right.
So God is big enough to be not only male, but female, and big enough to be both at the same time. That'll mess somebody's head up even right there. Because we live in this often patriarchal society, where we want to give male qualities. We want to give male qualities superiority over female qualities. And so we have to be careful even of that imagery in our lives, because that then impacts how we treat the females in our lives. Somehow believe that the male image is superior to the female image, then ultimately that bleeds down into how I treat the females in my life, subconsciously as well as consciously. So we have to be so very careful of imagery in every way and in every space in which we live, because when we ultimately have the right perspective on imagery, we have the right perspective on ourselves, and have the right perspective on those that are around us.
Fellas, when you have the right perspective on imagery, you have the right perspective on yourselves. Marinate on that one. And Day, you're the pastor in St. Paul CME Church in Savannah. How can folks follow you, connect with you? If they want to come check the church out, what's the best way to do so, man?
Sure. So you can check out our website at the Paul Savannah, THEPAUL Savannah.org. You can also follow us on, we have our own app. You can just download that from the App Store and follow us every week. We're on Facebook Live every Sunday at 11 o'clock on our Facebook page, St. Paul CME Savannah. You can also reach out to us on Twitter. We're on Twitter as well, at the Paul Savannah. So there's, all of the basic social media platforms. We're out there, and obviously we're out there on the web, so you can find us that way as well. And then if you're ever in the Savannah area, we're located at 1601 Bonner Street in Savannah, Georgia, in Midtown Savannah. So we're wherever you need us to be, we can be there.
Awesome. And I appreciate you, man, for having the time to chop it up with me on these airwaves and
Sure.
Connect with the Black Fathers Now family, man, and sharing your journey, sharing your story, but then also sharing some insight that we can, take and, process, but then apply to our lives. So I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It was awesome.
Oh, no doubt, man. And fellas, as always, show the guests some love. If you're in Savannah, definitely check out St. Paul 1601 Barnett Street in Savannah, Georgia. And I'll have all their social media links in the show notes. So definitely check them out. And if you ever pop by and you see Reverend Thurmond, you let them know that you heard about him on Black Fathers Now. And if you catch up with them on social media, also shoot them some messages and let them know you heard about them on Black Fathers Now as well. But fellas, as always, make sure to follow Black Fathers Now on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Visit blackfathersnow.com. Make sure to subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Amazon Alexa, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe, share, and leave comments. Also on YouTube as well. This is obviously, if you're watching the video, you're seeing this on my YouTube channel, but also subscribe to the YouTube channel where you can see the videos of some of the interviews that have been conducted and some other stuff as well. And definitely visit blackfamilyapparel.com. Grab some awesome apparel that celebrates the nuances of the Black family, and grab a copy of my book, Dynamic Black Fatherhood Manifesto, 10 commitments necessary for excellence in Black fatherhood. And fellas, until next time, y'all be blessed, well, and wise, and I'll holler at you. Peace.